Sorry, I don't love you. Afraid you've grown accustomed to. Cause with you, something isn't wrong, something isn't wrong, something isn't right. I wish you could be happy.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back, as is Tim Matthews. Today we're going to be talking all about the Avengers from 2012. I know that sounds so long ago at this point, but when you think about it, I mean, is 6 years really that long ago? But anyway, how are you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty well. It was very interesting to rewatch this film, and one of the first things I want to really dive into are the characters, because without all of these characters, you know, the Avengers wouldn't exist in any way, shape, or form. So we had already seen some of the characters previously, and I think the one we had seen the least of really was Hawkeye. He had a kind of cameo appearance in one of the previous films, but this was sort of his big moment, and both him and Black Widow are characters who have not had a solo movie as far as, you know, the characters go for this original team here with the Avengers.
Right. Yeah, Hawkeye, his little spiel was in Thor, and then I think all we've had from Black Widow so far was she was in Iron Man 2, I think. Yeah.
Was she not in the first Captain America? I get them all confused.
If she was, it was just the very end. But I don't think so, because the first Captain America was pretty much all like a period piece, and then the tail end of him like being found in the ice and everything. But she was a huge part in Winter Soldier. That was basically like a team up movie between the two of them.
Yeah, I definitely get all the Captain Americas confused, because that, you know, like Civil War seems like an Avengers movie, not a Captain America movie, and it's just,
oh yeah,
it can get all over the place.
Yeah, it 100% is just Avengers 2.5.
Yeah, pretty much. And, you know, I think seeing the least of those two characters is really interesting, because they're also the two that don't have any powers really. And, you know, Black Widow obviously is a trained assassin, and I would say has a larger skill set than Hawkeye does. So to have those two be a part of the Avengers from the start, did you feel that was an interesting choice to make?
Yeah, I mean, I guess whenever you look at like any of the superhero teams, there always seems to be the one that is completely and ultimately superpowered, and then it like trickles down from there. There's others that they have a bit more powers, but they're not as invincible as say the ones higher up. And then you keep going down lower, and there's always the human characters that end up on the teams. I don't know a huge amount of Avengers history in the comics, so I don't know necessarily when. I know in like some of the more like modern ones, you know, Hawkeye and Black Widow were involved, probably especially because of the movie. They were more popular, so they started using them more. But could be wrong on any of that. I definitely think it's interesting having them on it, and they even in this movie kind of team them together. We get a little bit of that they have kind of a shared past. I mean, she's kind of roped into the whole thing in the beginning when Coulson calls her, and she's like, I'm in the middle of something, and as soon as he says Barton's been compromised, she's like locked in, and she's ready. She's like, okay, I'm coming in. What do I need to do to help him out? And we get a bit more like peppered in with them, which I always thought sounded like an interesting history and a film a film or a mini series or something I'd really like to see, but we've yet to really get much more with those characters.
Yeah, it definitely felt like those two had some sort of history together, and it was almost like they were kind of a package deal or something like that. Yeah. But you have Thor and Captain America, and Thor is obviously a god, and Captain America was an ice, and under all these crazy circumstances came to have powers. And then Tony Stark technically doesn't have any powers either. He just has a really fancy suit with powers. So I guess in a sense, most of the Avengers are unpowered humans.
Yeah.
But Iron Man is definitely one of the original Avengers here. And I actually pulled up the lineup from the very, very first Avengers comics, and it was Ant-Man, the Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, and the Wasp, and then Captain America was discovered to be trapped in ice about a few issues into the run. So he wasn't an original Avenger, but that lineup is still very different, even though it still had Iron Man, Thor, and the Hulk. So you have these three characters that sort of make up the history of the Avengers, so to speak, in the comics, and that makes sense. But I don't know if Ant-Man and the Wasp would have been good right off the bat, because we did get the Ant-Man movie later on, and we have Ant-Man and the Wasp coming this summer, actually, but it just would have felt off, I think, to have those two characters in it from the start. And putting Black Widow in was a really smart move, because the character just kind of blew up from there. And even in the comics, there are really good Black Widow runs that started after her appearances in the film. And you were right, it was Iron Man 2 that she was in, and then Winter Soldier was the big part she had with Captain America. So it'll be interesting to see down the line if they actually do complete that Black Widow solo film, because there's been talk about it, but it hasn't really made much progress, and that kind of sucks, just because she's been such a staple in the movies since Iron Man 2.
Yeah, and rewatching this movie, and like obviously knowing that we're going to be talking about it, kind of paying even that much more attention to some of the dialogue, I never really noticed how much of like all the little teases we get to her history.
Right.
And her history sounds so interesting. And so it's just when you think about how long the MCU's been going on and we've yet to get a film, it's not like she has a lackluster amount of storylines. Because half the time watching these scenes with her and getting little bits of her background, I'm like, all right, that would be really cool to see. And I really like the idea of some of these films peppering in a bit more of the past. I mean, we have a lot that's going forward, but I really like, for instance, in Ant-Man, we get kind of like the flashbacks with Hank Pym, and even in like some of the Iron Man stuff, we get a bit of the past with Howard Stark, and then there was Agent Carter and all that. I think it's really cool to, when they pepper in the histories of these characters, some further back, some more recent, but it just makes the MCU just feel that much more alive and not like it only started, with Cap or with Iron Man. So hopefully we get more from those characters, because they get a decent amount to do in this movie, but still not enough.
Yeah, and like you said, they pepper the history in there, so we aren't getting full-on histories for each of these characters before we see them. And the team doesn't get along right off the bat either, which I think is something that is crucial, because anytime you see a team working well together, it's because they've been playing together for a while, whether it's sports or what have you, or just, like a team of people who work together on an app or something like that. It's like you have to get used to everyone's workflow and how they do things and everything like that. So to see them fight each other quite a bit in this made sense too. And while it wasn't always, the best situation or anything like that, it made sense. And I think, looking back on this film too, a lot of the characters had their own issues to work through in this movie, so it wasn't going to go smoothly right off the bat anyway.
Right. Yeah, they're all coming from basically being so used to being solo acts to suddenly roped into they all kind of had an idea that Fury was trying to put a team together, but then it was like the plan was scrapped. And so here they are, they're off just all doing their own things. And then it's like, hey, there's this, crazy shit that's coming, and, possibly aliens and stuff from other worlds that you've never had to deal with. Cool if you all get together and help us out. And so then they're just thrusted into this and have to, like you said, they have to learn to work together in a very, very short period of time. And as we see throughout the film, that doesn't go well for most of the film.
Yeah, plus we haven't mentioned Loki just yet either, and he's sort of the main villain, so to speak, for the movie, and they do end up fighting all of these other creatures and, this giant flying metal whale thing in the sky.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the actual name for it is, but, they're dealing with this otherworldly threat, and even Thor alone is not enough to stop his own brother. So even though Loki has changed over the years and over the different movies that he's been in, this is like Loki at his worst, in my opinion, in the MCU, because he sort of starts doing things to help Thor. And that's something you see more of in later films and everything like that. But this movie is setting him up as the big bad villain. And it's really interesting to see the brother dynamic between him and Thor in this. And then one of my favorite moments in the film was when Hulk just picks him up and starts smashing him into the ground in Stark Tower. And it's just one of the funniest moments in the movie too, even though it's pretty brutal. But then you see Loki sort of just laying there afterwards, and he's like, "Oh, I see now."
Yeah. I'll never forget sitting in the theater, seeing the movie for the first time, and everyone in the theater, of course, absolutely lost it at that scene, because you're expecting that, oh, they're just going to start fighting. And so for Hulk to just grab him and just whip him around and just say puny God, like it was just perfect.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier Hawkeye being the one that was compromised, so he was under Loki's control, and that was interesting there too, because Hawkeye was the obvious choice for that move, because he was probably the one who was going to resist the least, and it literally takes Natasha punching him in the head and basically giving him this head injury to make him snap out of it. And she understands what she has to do, so that really just shows how strong their friendship is, because he's not even upset with her later. Like, he's not like, "Oh, you punched me in the head? Seriously?" But he's totally understanding, and that sort of says everything you need to know about their friendship over the years and everything like that. And we learn a lot more about Hawkeye's personal life in later films, but here it's just nice that, like you said, you get these little tidbits of what makes these characters tick, and to see how they interact with each other. Obviously, Natasha and Hawkeye get along the best out of the team already, probably, but the only problem is she's fighting against Hawkeye for the beginning portion of the movie, and it isn't until she does hit him in the face that they're able to get him back and get him back on their side. So it is one of those interesting things where I'm sure people are like, well, how is Hawkeye still alive? Especially with Infinity War coming up and everything they've gone through since then. So it might feel a little unlikely, but I don't know if he sticks around much longer, to be honest. But we'll do some Infinity War speculation a bit later.
Nice.
Another thing that I want to talk about for characters is Phil Coulson, because he is what ties the cinematic universe to the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show in a bigger sense. This was when the show was really tied into what the movies are doing. And right now it's really unclear if there's any connection between Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and what's coming up in Infinity War. I have no idea. But even though we know Phil Coulson is brought back to life and everything like that, it was still so weird to watch him die in this. And it was just one of those moments that was really well done, because you're like, oh yeah, I forgot he actually died.
Yeah. I remember that being such a great scene, to watch, obviously the first time when we didn't know that he was coming back. And here it was this great moment, and it is the moment that Fury uses to really bring them all together, to stop their bickering and be like, look, this is what happens if we're not united. We lose people, and we lost someone who was like all in this, and cared about each of these characters coming together. It's one of those things that I personally haven't really watched much of S.H.I.E.L.D. I started with like the first season, and it wasn't really clicking for me. I heard it got really cool with some other stuff later on, but I'm kind of on the side of I personally like pretend that he's still dead because I feel like it's just so cheap to just know that he's still alive, and it was like the start of the frustration with the MCU that it didn't feel like there was always consequences to things.
Right.
But it is still, even knowing, that he's still alive, it is still a moving scene. And it still kind of gets you a bit. And yeah, I don't know what's going on with any of the TV tie-ins and stuff. Even I think the directors of Infinity War came out and were like, yeah, it was impossible to tie in like the Netflix stuff. And so it's kind of like, well, why even bother saying this stuff is connected if you're not going to bring these things together? But part of me still hoping we can get Daredevil and all of them in there, but who knows?
Yeah, and the thing with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. too is it's funny watching this and looking back on all the references that tie into later seasons of the show, because there's a moment when Tony Stark mentions LMDs, and that was a big part of S.H.I.E.L.D. fairly recently. And you also see Malik, who is on the video conference with Fury, and he's not named in the Avengers, but if you have watched S.H.I.E.L.D. and you go back and you watch this, he's instantly recognizable to you because he played such a big role in S.H.I.E.L.D. later on. So it's really interesting to see, looking back on how things ended up tying into S.H.I.E.L.D., even if it wasn't simultaneously with the films and everything, because it did tie into Captain America quite a bit at one point too.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that was when I heard that the show was really, really kicking into gear, was leading into Winter Soldier. I heard that all the tie-ins and stuff were really, really crazy, and a lot of fun with that. So that's really cool if when you go back and watch this movie, that it kind of like rounds out the world a little bit more for you because you have this extra backstory. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and just generally discuss the movie now, because
Sure.
we haven't brought up one of the major plot points here, and it's the Tesseract. So that is the cube that Loki comes to steal, and he does so successfully, and it powers his weapon, basically his staff, or whatever you want to call it. I don't recall exactly what words they used in the film, but
I think Tony called it the his glowing stick of destiny.
that sounds like a Tony thing he would say. So, whatever you want to call it, his staff, for a lack of a better word right now. But, he took the Tesseract and he built this machine. Well, he didn't build it. He stole one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s people and had him build it for him. And it opened up this giant portal, which is where all of the otherworldly creatures came from, and the giant flying whale thing made of metal or whatever it was. And
Space whale.
yeah, that's pretty much what it looked like to me. And it was just like floating in the air and destroying all of New York.
Yeah.
But they have all of these creatures that they're fighting, and it's basically just one big distraction for Loki to do whatever he wants. And it completely backfires in stunning fashion, which is, typical for Loki at this point. And I just thought that was an interesting way to bring Loki into the fold for, being the reason the Avengers are brought together, basically. And I don't know if there would have been another villain who would have made sense, because you have Loki as Thor's brother too. So it's personal for Thor, and he sort of just ends up needing everyone else's help too. So it was sort of the perfect circumstances, even though they were not fantastic circumstances by any means, for the team to come together. And, I don't think that Avengers is a perfect movie by any means, because what movie is at this point, especially when it comes to superheroes, because people are always so split on it. But when I was rewatching it, I was like, oh, this might have been a little better than I initially remembered, because I'm not one who rewatches a ton of stuff. I can't even tell you when I saw this. I don't know if I saw it in theater or if I saw it at some point later, because I hadn't been into the movies quite as much just yet. So I can't even tell you when the first time I watched this was. So to go back and get all of these little tidbits, like you said, because I watched Shield and I've watched the other movies more recently, I think that made it a little more fun in a way for me.
Yeah, it definitely rewatching it. I wasn't sure. The biggest thing, like you said, this movie was like 6 years ago, and frankly, I thought it was even longer than that, just because it feels like the MCU's been going on forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure going back to it how it necessarily was going to hold up. I definitely agree that Loki is the perfect villain for the film, because you get that bit of Shakespearean story with Thor and Loki. You know, typical Loki feels that he's the one true king, and should lead everything, and that Thor doesn't deserve all the stuff he gets. And it does add that bit of it does add that personal tie to everything going on. When you think about all the MCU villains that we had up to this point, because ideally, if they weren't going to use Loki, you would think they'd choose a villain that we had some familiarity with, and none of them really have the staying power as Loki does, except for, like, the only other one I could think of would be Red Skull, which would have a tie-in with Cap, but even so, I don't think it would have been as strong as Loki, and of course, just as charismatic as Tom Hiddleston is. I mean, he just nails it. Yeah, I mean, I definitely still very, very much enjoy the film. I don't think it ages perfectly.
Yeah.
There's definitely a decent amount of it that feels like sets. Cap's costume is very cosplay.
Yeah.
But overall, it's like, even for, any faults, I still have a ton of fun with the film.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned feeling like this movie was so long ago, even though it wasn't, because the MCU did start 10 years ago at this point, and Iron Man came out in May of 2008. But at that point in time, it was taking Marvel a lot longer to get their movies done, because between 2008 and the Avengers in May of 2012, they had released 6 movies. They didn't release a single movie tying into the MCU in 2009, and they only did Iron Man 2 in 2010. So there was a bit of a bigger gap in between films there, and you could tell they were really trying to get things rolling, and things definitely picked up more with phase 2, because then they started doing about 2 movies a year, and last year they actually had 3 movies. So they definitely ramped things up after phase 1, but to have this be the movie that closed out phase 1 made a lot of sense too, because it's like, okay, all of these people know each other now. So now we can move on and give you these other stories and have the characters pop in here and there. And then, in 2014, they introduced the Guardians and everything like that. And Infinity War is really acting as the movie where literally all of the heroes meet. All of them, except for the ones who have died already, which sucks for them. But,
Yeah.
I think Avengers is really what got them into this mindset. And they were like, okay, we know how to do this now, because they had Captain America, the first Avenger, and the Avengers release back to back, which I think that was a fairly good run for them, even though The Winter Soldier tends to be the movie people love more out of the Captain America films. It was like, okay, here's Cap, here are the Avengers, we're gonna get this rolling now. And I feel like even if this movie isn't the best of the MCU, it didn't necessarily need to be. It just needed to hook people enough to keep them coming to the movies. And obviously that's something that's happened, because if these movies would have all tanked, they wouldn't still be doing them 10 years later.
Oh yeah. I mean, when you look at Iron Man, and it has that post credits with Nick Fury, it was, just this tease, back then. And no one knew, is this building towards something? Is this just kind of a fun little thing? The post credit scene wasn't the norm back then, and then I want to say Incredible Hulk was after that, and you get a post credit with Tony, and it's like, oh man, these are connected. And with each of the ones that followed before Avengers, and you've got Iron Man 2, you've got the first Thor, and then you've got Captain America, the first Avenger, which I personally do thoroughly enjoy. I definitely think of the Captain America movies, Winter Soldier is the best, but I really enjoy First Avenger. But this movie's the payoff. Like, this movie is the appreciation to the fans coming out to all those movies, and it's like, hey, you know, this thing that we've been leading towards, here it is, you're welcome. And everyone went nuts for it. It's and when you think, oh, okay, maybe this movie isn't the best of the MCU, that's not a bad thing, because you would hope that all the movies that followed it would just continue to get better rather than stay the same or get worse. And I'm sure, you know, they have ups and downs in quality and varying opinions. But this movie, even though Iron Man was the first one, this movie, I feel like, is the true start to the MCU. When this happened, it's like, all right, this is a real thing. We're all in, and let's see where all these characters go from here. I thought what this movie also did a nice job with was the way it introduces the characters and I feel like it gives you enough about each of them so that if someone didn't necessarily watch all those other movies, they were still able to understand who these characters were, and then hopefully they enjoyed the movie enough to go back and watch the others.
And they also have the situation with the Hulk where, you know, people weren't super fond of the standalone Hulk movie, but he works better, in a sense, making appearances in all of these other movies. And I think this movie might be one of my favorite Hulk appearances outside of Thor Ragnarok. I think that's where Hulk really gets to shine, in that movie. But of the Avengers movies and everything, I think this one was the best, because you see that Banner is definitely still somewhat in control, because even though he falls out of the sky and, you know, crashes into this big empty warehouse looking building, he finds his way back to the Avengers. And I'm not 100% sure that is something that will last very long with the Hulk, because in the comics, the Hulk eventually totally gets rid of the Bruce Banner part of him, and he just stays the Hulk all the time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in Infinity War with a lot of these characters, mostly because we know that Infinity War has to have way more consequences than this did, and I'm totally okay with them killing off, well, quote unquote, killing off Phil Coulson in Avengers as opposed to killing off one of the major heroes, because I don't think that would have convinced people to keep coming back for the movies quite as much if they had killed off someone, as if they had killed off one of the team members, that is. So it was definitely a good move to have them not really have too many consequences in this. Obviously, New York suffers most of the consequences, and I think that was a bold thing to do too, because even though at this point 9/11 had happened a while ago, it's still something that is really weird to see when movies destroy New York City, especially in the way that they did it in the Avengers, because there were blocks of buildings that were just completely damaged. And, you know, it was funny at the end, though, because you see all of the damage to Tony Stark's building, and all that's left standing is the A. And we know that plays into the future movies and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it definitely, because if they had killed any of the heroes, you know they were going to end up killing probably Hawkeye or Black Widow, but most likely Hawkeye, because they would have killed off someone that hasn't had their own movie and has kind of just been introduced. We saw that with Age of Ultron. They brought in Quicksilver, and to give kind of an emotional punch to that film, they killed off Quicksilver, but it didn't really work because it wasn't a character that we had grown to love. It's like, oh, okay, well, it's really sad that you killed him, but he's not one of the characters that we love. So I'll probably forget about him by the next time we're in another movie. But Coulson, even though he was not a huge role in the other movies, he has been that tie to pull all the films together so far. And I feel like him just being a bystander, basically, between that and then the bystanders in New York being the ones that are majorly affected, I feel like builds to the heroes that it's like, awesome, you saved the day, but there were consequences with bystanders, and we need to work harder at working together to limit that damage. I love one of my favorite parts is just the montage of at the end where you're getting the reactions from New Yorkers, and you're getting you're getting some that of course are like, oh my God, they saved my life, that's great, and then you get others that are like, seriously, all this shit's messed up, like who's gonna fix this, like where are they now, they came and messed all this up and now they're just hanging out, who's gonna come clean this up? And then of course you have Stan Lee just being like, superheroes, nah.
Yeah, plus you have Shield in this movie too. That's something we haven't talked entirely too much about. We've mentioned the tie to the Agents of Shield show, but Shield itself is a huge part of this movie because Shield is the government entity, I guess you could say, that put the Avengers protocol in place, and that's what we see a lot of at the beginning. Phil shows up at Stark's place and is just sort of trying to get Stark to take this, and Pepper has to take it for him instead and then give it to him, which is, their relationship is hilarious as well. It's just the needed comic relief in something where there's such a serious situation going on and New York is literally in peril pretty much. But with Shield, we get Director Fury, Phil Coulson, obviously, and then Maria Hill is someone we haven't mentioned yet, too. And, I don't think this movie was the best use of Maria Hill because we've definitely seen her in roles that were better suited for her. And this, it really felt like she was sort of just there to have that big chase down at the beginning. And then it's like she kind of disappeared and then just popped up here and there. But because there were so many people in this movie, it's kind of a given that someone wouldn't get to shine as much as we know they could just from either their history in the comics or now from seeing all of these other movies or TV shows.
Yeah, I think with the hindsight of having seen the movies that followed, we've gotten a little more used to the MCU introducing someone into a movie and they may not have the biggest role, but it's just kind of like planting them in there, like with Maria Hill, that it's like, yeah, she doesn't really do that much, but then we see like in Winter Soldier, she gets more to do, and just kind of like, here's this character, kind of get to know her, and maybe we'll revisit her later, and it's just rounding out the world a bit. Because she definitely doesn't get a ton to do in this movie. The opening scene is it's a slog for me to get through on repeated views. It's kind of like, all right, let's get to the other characters. I don't really know Maria Hill that well, and let's just get through the little chase scene and then move on.
Yeah, and the movie didn't have a legit team shot until about an hour and 52 minutes into the movie too. So that's one of those things where you finally see them all in frame and they sort of have their poses going on kind of, and it takes a long time for them to build up to getting all of these members together and getting them on board with working with each other because, like you said earlier, they're so used to doing things solo. So you have to really put a lot of work into just convincing these characters to work together. And you see Tony sort of hits it off a little with Bruce because they basically speak the same intelligent language that most other people don't understand, even the audience, I would say, because I was like, I don't even know what they're saying anymore, but it sounds right. So it's one of those things where you can tell which characters are sort of going to be getting along really well. And with Natasha, it's interesting because she has this history with Clint already, Hawkeye, and she has sort of this way with Bruce, even though things don't go super well for the two of them in this film because he does go after her.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where you can see her relationship with Bruce just sort of kindling in this movie. And even though I don't necessarily agree with some decisions they made with the two of them down the line or anything like that, it's something that you can see happening from the start once you go back and you're like, oh, okay, all of this is clicking now. And it's really amazing how much thought Marvel puts into these stories, because I don't know if a lot of other films would do this, because there's always the conversation between Marvel and DC and everything like that. And I think the things like this, the little things, are the things that DC doesn't have down quite as well yet to make us really care so much about these characters.
Yeah, like Marvel definitely, they certainly have, certainly now, especially in the MCU timeline, they certainly have the luxury of kind of honing this whole process, and you knowing that they can seed all these little things, and if it comes to fruition, people are going to go nuts for it, and if it doesn't come to fruition, it was only a tiny little thing, and people aren't necessarily going to freak out about it. I'm a huge DC fan. I mean, especially when it comes to the comics,
right?
I don't necessarily have an allegiance to any company, but I tend to read more DC than I do Marvel. But as much as I enjoy a number of the things that the films are doing, the thing that the studio mostly did wrong was they just tried to rush and catch up. And I feel like you, not only with DC, you saw Universal trying to do it with the Universal monsters, with the Mummy. I mean,
right.
They made a huge cardinal sin by naming their universe before they even put out their first movie. And it's all these studios being like, look at that magic that Marvel's put off. We can do that, right? And not really thinking about all the minute things that Marvel puts into it to make it work. They're just like, yeah, I mean, if we put movies out there and we say they're connected, it's cool, right? And it's definitely something that, some little bit of magic that Marvel has figured out, and for some reason, just other studios can't really latch onto it. I certainly hope DC does figure it out, because I mean, more superhero movies on both sides of the aisle is better for everybody. And if both sides are doing well, they're both going to challenge each other to make better films. Because certainly we don't want Marvel to feel like they're soaring so far ahead that they could just do anything and then maybe get lazy. I don't think they will, but we don't want them to either.
Yeah, and with Marvel, you even see how long it took them to get Spider-Man into their own universe, because Marvel is splintered in a way that DC isn't. DC and Warner Brothers have, as far as I know, all of the rights to all of the DC characters, whereas Marvel,
I believe so, yeah.
They have the X-Men in one area, the Spider-Man characters in another area, so that really limits them a lot, because Spider-Man and his rogues gallery is huge for the Marvel universe in the comics and everything.
Yeah.
So to not be able to use those characters for, the first 8 years or so of their MCU, it just goes to show how they took what they had and they made it work. And like I said, while not every movie is going to be absolutely fantastic, with the Avengers, they got the formula down. And what I like about the movie too is that they don't rush into introducing us to every character. I don't think Thor is even in the first 30 minutes of the movie. He doesn't show up until they've already set up the whole storyline with Loki. And then Thor comes in and it was like, okay, this is my brother, guys. We have a problem.
Yeah. And by that point, we've already been given kind of a little bit with Bruce Banner, which is important because we're introducing a new actor.
Right.
And I feel like he gets the most kind of the most backstory out of the Avengers being introduced into the film. And he and Tony kind of hit it off pretty quickly, just being science bros, which is anytime that they're getting together and just doing all their science things. I always enjoy that. It's just so much fun watching them go back and forth. But yeah, I completely agree. Like, we got a little bit with Bruce Banner and kind of a bit of a tease to his relationship with Black Widow. And then a little bit later, we bring in Cap, and then, or maybe he's before. I'm not really sure of the timeline, but we get a little bit with each one before the next one comes in, and each time the new one comes in, we get a little bit of, before we bring in another character, it's like, all right, let's show how the characters we have so far react to the person we just brought in. And then, so it's when they bring in the next one, it's just very gradual. And that was something when I was coming to rewatch it. I was curious how I was going to feel with all those parts. Like I wasn't sure if I was going to sit there and be like, all right, I know where this goes. Can we just get to when they're all hanging out? But I found myself being a lot more interested in what they had to say in the little side conversations than I remembered, because I wasn't so much enthralled by just the spectacle of the Avengers are all together for the first time. Now it was like, all right, well, I know where this goes. So I got to enjoy the little things, and they really did a nice job with that. So, so obviously it's not perfect. Some parts are going to drag a little, but for the most part, I thought it worked.
Yeah, the thing is with introducing the characters too is basically Fury tasks Phil with getting Iron Man on board, and he goes and gets Cap himself, and Black Widow is sent to go get Bruce Banner. So you're having these three characters split off to go get three other characters who we already know about. So it's one of those things where it's kind of all happening simultaneously. And one thing I do want to note is not only do they have some verbal comedic relief in here, but they also have some physical comedy when Fury goes to find Cap, because he's wailing on the punching bag and he hits it so hard that the sand comes pouring out of it and it's just on the ground. And you see he has like 6 other punching bags lined up on the ground behind him. Yeah. And he just picks one up. So clearly this has
happened before.
Yeah, so he just picks one up and then he leaves with it after he's done talking to Fury too. Yeah. And it's one of those things where he doesn't even have to say anything about the punching bag at all. And it's just still one of those little funny moments. And at times Marvel does go a little overboard with those because, they don't need to put jokes in at every turn or anything like that. Yeah. But a lot of these characters do sort of have some of those qualities from the comics, especially Spider-Man now. Spider-Man is one of the quippiest superheroes in Marvel's history, pretty much. So you certainly have to have that with him, and it helps that now with the Tom Holland casting, he's a bit younger, I think, than the other 2 actors were. Obviously younger than Tobey Maguire. Yeah. But I think he's even younger than Andrew Garfield was when he played the role of Spider-Man. So it's very interesting what they're doing with him. But before we get into a little more Infinity War talk, one big thing we haven't talked about yet is the post-credit scene. And we see Thanos in this, so it just got me so excited for Infinity War 2. But the post-credit scene, we go back to where the film started, pretty much, it looks like. And so we're on this other planet, and someone is talking to Thanos. I'm really bad with knowing and keeping track of everyone's names, especially when it comes to, like people involved in Guardians of the Galaxy, because there are so many different planets and everything like that going on there. But we just see a shot of Thanos's face at the end, and he doesn't even say anything, I don't think, when we see him. And it's just a very powerful moment. And it's something that might not have meant as much to us before seeing all of the rest of these movies, but now that Infinity War is on the way, it's like, okay, they started this and knew exactly where they were going to end up 10 years ago, pretty much. Maybe a little after, maybe more so when the Avengers movie happened in 2012, but it's like they have been planning this for years. So I think that's why it makes more sense that there weren't nearly as many consequences up until this point too, because they sort of had this plan, I think, to build up to Thanos and the amount of destruction that he can cause.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, that moment, the first time seeing Thanos, and it's perfect that they don't have him say anything, because they just allow the presence there. And I feel like one of the things that Marvel does that's really cool is especially with their post-credit scenes, and even little things peppered throughout the movies, little Easter eggs. There's so much inside baseball with their lore and their characters, and I like that they don't tend to shy away from that. Like I appreciate that they don't necessarily sit there and say, "Oh, well, that's too deep cut. Most audiences aren't going to pick up on this. We shouldn't put it in there." I like that they just go for it, because I remember when I saw Avengers and everyone went nuts when they're looking at this guy with a big purple face. I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh man, cool. So who is that? And like but then I got to have the friends that I was with start giving me all this backstory. And then it was like, oh man, there's a bunch of stuff in the comics that I wasn't aware of, because I growing up wasn't the biggest Marvel person. I was a Spider-Man kid for sure. Spider-Man is my absolute favorite. So the fact that he is mixed in with all this is I'm in heaven. I'm like, just give me more of him and I'm happy. But that's one of the coolest things, and I think is just giving us all these nods to the lore that might go somewhere, and clearly Thanos is where it's all going. I mean, this is where 10 years is building up to, and it's going to, hopefully be huge and, have some consequences and really hit us hard with everything, because we have been along for this journey. So, I mean, there's no other way you can slice it. The hype for everything that is built up to this is huge, but they've definitely put in the legwork. Because all the way back to Avengers 1, they were like, hey, here's Thanos. And then they gave us a little bit of him in, what is it? Is it the first Guardians the next time we see him?
I think so. Or either that or it's another post-credit scene before Guardians.
I think Age of Ultron, I want to say at the end of that one, is the one where he is the first time we see the gauntlet, because he puts it on and he's like, fine, I'll finish it myself or something.
Right.
I want to say that was Age of Ultron, but they all do start to blend together after so many years.
Yeah, before we move on to some speculation for Infinity War here, though, I do want to note that when I rewatched this, I did notice that one of the cops in the movie, the one that has the older partner and Cap is basically giving them instructions on what to do, he is actually Daniel Souza and Agent Carter. So it was really funny to see someone who is actually in the MCU, technically, just in some random cameo role, basically, since Agent Carter took place, 50 years before Avengers or something like that?
Maybe he's a son or grandson and just has a really, really close resemblance.
Yeah, and obviously Agent Carter was way after this. Agent Carter, was a few years ago, and it's just funny to look at those things and be like, oh, here he is again.
I love that in movies, especially in like trilogies and stuff, where it's like you have someone who's just an extra and has like one line or something, and then they're friends of the filmmaker or something, and so they're brought back to maybe do another like one line, but they're a completely different character.
Yeah.
And you see it on TV shows all the time. I want to say it's X-Files, where there's one of the characters that becomes like a major antagonist is just like just a one-off, completely different character in an early episode, and then he ends up becoming a major antagonist later on, but that obviously wasn't the character he played before. And it's just one of those things, you suspend disbelief, and you're just like, I mean, they're all actors and they're working, but it's fun for the fans to be like, oh man, it's that guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's go ahead and move into some Infinity War speculation here, because there's been a lot of talk about which hero is going to die. And a lot of what I've been seeing has been, Iron Man or Captain America. But I feel like I don't know how Hawkeye survives any of this, or, if Hawkeye even shows up. It seems like he's been hiding in the trailers and everything. But
I thought I thought I saw someone say at the end of Civil War or something, like he basically retires to just go be with his family. I mean, I would assume Thanos shows up. It's probably, he's probably like, honey, I gotta go.
Yeah, it's like an all hands on deck situation, probably. So it'll be interesting to see if he does end up coming back, because I do vaguely remember that from Civil War. Hawkeye was pretty tired and he has a wife and kids that literally no one knew about prior to that.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And it's something we do eventually get a glimpse of in the movies, but the thing is, people have been wondering why Marvel hasn't been announcing more movies and everything like that. And my logic behind their decision to do that is that they don't want to spoil who lives and who dies.
Yeah.
So the only thing I can say for certain is that Spider-Man Homecoming 2 is in the works. So
Yeah.
it would be really bad to kill off Tom Holland already. And that is probably one of the least likely characters to die. But
oh, I walk if they kill him.
Yeah.
Second that happens, I'm out of the theater. No, they already announced that one, so we can put him in the safe pile.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we mentioned the Black Widow solo movie, and that is something where I think with her it could go either way, because they could always just go back in time and tell an assassin story with Black Widow or something, and I would totally watch that. I'd watch pretty much anything they came up with for Black Widow, as long as it was a decent storyline. That's all I really need from them to want to go see that movie. But
yeah, because I was going to say there's no way they kill her off, because fans would riot if they killed her off before giving her own movie. But if they put it in the past, then it could work out. I still feel like fans would be pissed.
Yeah, they certainly would. And I think especially because a lot of fans probably like her more than, say, Scarlet Witch.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where some of the newer characters we aren't quite as attached to. I would say Vision is the one exception, because we've been hearing his voice as Jarvis all of these years.
Yeah.
So that is one thing where it's like, you aren't necessarily tied to the physical version of the character, but in a sense, it would be like a big part of the MCU just dying with him. And that will be interesting to see. But I do think they have to go with someone like Iron Man or Captain America to really make it believable. And whether they do that in Infinity War or in Avengers 4, it doesn't really matter necessarily to me, but I think they definitely have to kill off at least a couple of heroes in Infinity War.
Yeah. It's like, I don't want to say I hope for a certain character, because it's like I like all of them, and I don't necessarily want a specific one to die. But I was in the camp of, I was disappointed that Cap wasn't killed off in Civil War. I don't mind that he's still alive. That's certainly great, but I felt like that would have been a really, really great place to do it. I feel like if you went with Cap, and if Cap gets killed off in Infinity War, then you can build towards the whole thing of Bucky taking up the shield, which is, of course, another major storyline. And then I think Cap comes back somehow with all that, which would be nice if they did that storyline with those, because I would get more Red Skull, because I miss having him. But I definitely agree. Like, they got to go either Tony or Cap.
Plus, it sounds like Chris Evans is done once this current contract is up. I've been seeing that floating around, and it makes sense because being part of the MCU takes up so much of someone's time. And I know quite a few of them have been in other movies here and there, but I think that's more, indie productions maybe than necessarily these major movies and everything like that. So it'll be interesting to see who, after all this time, ends up opting out, because Robert Downey Jr. has been doing this longer than everyone else. He's been playing Iron Man since 2008, and it wasn't until later that the rest of the characters were introduced. And, even Chris Hemsworth has been doing this for a while, because Thor happened before the Avengers. So they do have a lot of ways they can go with this, because Iron Man is more the suit than Tony Stark. And I know it would suck to lose Tony Stark as a character too, but there are plenty of different ways they could do things, because you could even introduce Riri Williams, or maybe have Shuri from Black Panther take on the Ironheart mantle or something like that, because she could certainly give Tony Stark a run for his money. She might even be smarter than him for all we know. And there are just so many different options they've opened up with all of these movies over the years. And obviously Bucky being Cap makes sense, because that's something they've sort of been building up to for a while. And you even have, do we still have Falcon? Is he still around?
I think, he's still alive. Yeah.
so many heroes to keep track of, and War
Yeah.
Machine was badly injured in Civil War, so who knows where he's at this point. I'm not
Yeah.
entirely sure they've given us an update on that.
I feel like you can't. I feel like you can't kill off War Machine. They alluded to him being killed off in Civil War already, and then it, of course, turns out that he's still alive. So I feel like you can't kill him after that because I feel like you've already kind of used that emotional punch. But it's. I mean, they could definitely go with. I think it's more than likely it's going to be one of the main ones. But I mean, I guess there are some more side heroes that we have gotten a decent amount of time with that they could go with, but I feel like they're gonna want to build towards like the next generation of the Avengers. But I mean, who knows? And I'm not even sure what are they still doing. There's still the two Infinity War movies, right?
They've said that Avengers 4 is no longer a part 2 to Infinity
Okay.
War, so I don't know if the whole Thanos storyline will wrap up with this movie, but I think most of it will. And the movie is ridiculously long. I think it's over 2.5 hours, last I heard.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has to be
right
to fit in every. There's something like 60 characters or something in it.
Yeah, and that's not even counting the whole Wakandan army, probably.
Yeah.
So you certainly have a lot of people who need screen time, and obviously this movie is not the movie where you introduce new characters. It's where you sort of wrap up what we've been waiting for the last 10 years. And I think I heard that Captain Marvel is supposed to be in Avengers 4 at some point, but I don't think
so.
they're introducing her in this, which makes sense because to just throw Captain Marvel in one of the biggest moments in the MCU, it would be like, wait, who's this person?
Yeah. I feel like there's likely going to be like a tease to Captain Marvel and like a post-credits scene or something.
Yeah, because I think that's the next movie. I know that's coming out in 2019.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where the MCU goes after Infinity War, because it's kind of like, all right, well, Infinity War, we all fought Thanos. Where do you go after that? And I think Kevin Feige said like the way the phases have like been going, that post the whole Infinity War thing, I believe he said that they're gonna be changing it up a bit, and it's not necessarily going to be the, all right, here's the next phase, we're gonna build to the next big event. My hope is kind of they pull back a bit and give us more like Marvel team up movies. I think that would be a lot of fun, and we get more of the characters that way rather than just waiting for solo movie of this character or solo movie of this character. But I'm calling it right now. Howard the Duck saves the day. He defeats Thanos. I'm putting my money on it right now.
And they've technically introduced him already, so that's not something you really have to worry about.
Exactly. Yeah. I hope they don't kill him. I don't think we're going to see him.
That would definitely be interesting to have Howard the Duck going up against Thanos. But is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap up today?
Oh, man, trying to think of everything we covered. Yeah, I think this was an interesting and fun just trip down memory lane to just see kind of to remember where it all started while thinking of what's to come. It was fun and interesting to watch, especially some of these actors still kind of getting their sea legs with the role, because now that we've seen them in so many other movies and they've really gotten a hang of the character, it was funny I think Cap was one I noticed, and even Thor, that it was like, all right, they're having fun with it, but they're still kind of figuring things out a bit. And of course, Banner, because this was his first outing. But it was just really fun to go back and watch this movie, and I'm really, really excited for Infinity War, because that's going to be huge. I also still need to see Black Panther, for shame on me.
Yeah, I definitely recommend doing that before Infinity War. I know it's still heavily playing in theaters because people have gone to see it like 4 or 5 times, but
that was the thing. I really wanted to see it, but I was like, there were a couple smaller movies that were coming out, one being Annihilation.
Right.
And I was like, all right, some of these movies, these aren't going to be in theaters that long.
Yeah.
Black Panther's not going anywhere. That's safe. So I think maybe this weekend, especially after this discussion and kind of diving back into the the world of the MCU, I think this weekend I may run and see Black Panther.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to note earlier in the episode, when you mentioned Cap's suit looking a little bit like cosplay, it's safe to say that everything looked a lot brighter in this film too. Cap's costume or Cap's suit was really bright. The Iron Man suit seemed really bright. And if you look at the footage from Infinity War, everything is just so much darker. And I'm kind of really into it because it shows just how things have progressed over the years and, you know, sort of how worn down these heroes can get without needing to necessarily look like they've been worn down. So it's just interesting to see the differences in suits and everything too between the first Avengers film and now. So that's something else to look forward to as well. But, you know, I'm going to try to cover quite a few Marvel movies here, as many as I can, before I do an episode on Infinity War with MJ Rawls, who has been on the podcast plenty of other times. So you guys are probably familiar with him, but it's one of those things where it's just really interesting to go back and take a look at these. So hopefully I'll have some more Marvel episodes coming up here. I just did Jessica Jones with MJ. We did seasons 1 and 2, which totally has nothing to do with any of this at all, pretty much, but still a good show to check out. But Tim, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. It was definitely fun revisiting it.
Of course, absolutely. This was a ton of fun. I'm always happy to come on the show. Podcasts are fun.
Awesome. Well, we might hear you again in a week or two for all we know. I'll talk to you about that after the episode, though.
Awesome. Cool.
And for our listeners, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.